Well, I want to thank the organizers and the club here for running this conference. It's a great conference, it's a great format, and I feel acutely uncomfortable because I'm afraid I'm going to be speaking to the choir about national security. But sometimes you have to speak to the choir. I think, you know, in the United States today, we find ourselves moving into the most complex and potentially dangerous national security environment since the end of World War II. During the Cold War, the United States confronted Soviet expansionism, lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation from accident or design, endured crises like Hungary, Suez, 1956, Berlin, 61, Cuba, 62, Israel, 1973. We fought in Korea, we fought in Vietnam. I was there as a captain. I commanded an infantry company, came home on a stretcher. We fought in Central America in a war that Americans didn't admit, and we fought in Afghanistan. Truman and Ike gave us a strategy. That strategy was that we contain as best we can Soviet Marxist expansionism, and politics stops at the water's edge. Democrats and Republicans never really totally agreed, even with this strategy. Republicans always wanted to be tougher, more weapons, more Theory X. Democrats always want to be nicer, kinder, more negotiations. Can't we do it with international law? But gradually the rules of the road came to be defined. We stumbled sort of into strategic nuclear stability, and the Soviet Empire collapsed. What followed was a decade of Western triumphalism. In the early 1990s, we took the peace dividend. Americans asked us, I said we, Dan, we be America, right? Not me. I was in uniform. I sweated it out every year on the budgets. But Americans took the peace uniform, the peace dividend. And I remember in 1991, Colin Powell coming to the National War College where I was a one-star and asking, how do we, you know, America's a big country, but there's no threat, and so why do we need the armed forces? And we tried to define some illustrative planning scenarios. We said we still need the armed forces because well, there could be a drug hostage rescue case in South America, or Africa could have a coup, and you have to apply there. And then on the Hill, the Democrats said, look, those don't require 10 aircraft carriers. And finally, General Powell said, look, we're a big country. We've got worldwide interests. We need a large armed forces. And then in the 1990s, we struggled with how to use those armed forces. We never really had a national strategy in the 1990s. For Democrats, it was epitomized by Madeleine Albright's question to Colin Powell and the NSC staff in the early 90s. She said, Colin, you got all these forces, what are you going to do with them? Why don't you stop the war in Bosnia and stop that slaughter in Africa? Republicans said, hey, these allies in Europe, they've never paid their share. Bring the troops home, get it over with. Besides, I want them in my congressional district. And so we never really got a national strategy. And we made it through. We did eventually stop the war in the Balkans. I was a NATO commander. We stopped the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo with the 78-day air campaign. It's the last win in our win column that we had in the use of force, honestly. And we did it against the wishes of the Serbs, of course, against the wishes of many of our allies who thought that if you drop a couple of bombs, that Milosevic, the Yugoslav dictator, would surrender. And we did it against the wishes of many in the Pentagon, who only wanted to fight against Iraq. So we finished the 1990s. I retired in 2000. I've been a businessman since and on the fringes of politics. And we retired, when I retired, we were at the top of the world. Nobody could have imagined that this wasn't going to be the 21st century, another American century. We had an unchallenged military, an unchallengeable economy. English was the most popular and most widely spoken language in the world. And frankly, everyone wanted our culture. And then 9/11 happened. So today, when I look around, I see imminent crises coming. Venezuela, we started to talk about. We haven't talked about the South China Sea. That's a catastrophe waiting to happen. Iran, yes, everybody knows about it. Russian forces are poised to take action in Ukraine. All it takes is a trigger event. It's there, it's locked, it's cocked, it's on the shelf for Mr. Putin whenever he wants it. And then below that, there are challenges in the Baltics, the Balkans, and many other places of the world. But step back for a second and take a longer vision. We've been at war for almost 18 years. We haven't won. We didn't win in Iraq despite a great invasion and a fantastic group of generals and soldiers and military equipment that kicked Saddam back. And we were in Baghdad in 3 weeks. And then we didn't have a plan, and we didn't have the resources, and we didn't know what we were doing. And we stumbled through. In Afghanistan, it was like we went there, but we didn't have a plan to get Osama bin Laden. And when he appeared, we withheld the resources, and then in 2005, when it was clear we didn't know what we were doing, we asked NATO to come in. And the good Europeans who felt kind of guilty because they didn't support us in Iraq said, okay, we'll go into Afghanistan with you. And here we are in 2019 trying to negotiate our way out of Afghanistan. As one of my friends who was part of that negotiation was telling me the other day, I said, what's it going to be like? He said, it's going to be a way out for the United States. Terrorism hasn't been whipped yet. So ISIS may have lost its territory in the caliphate, but ISIS is still alive as well as the nations that support it. So long-term challenge number one, terrorism. Long-term challenge number two, actually the internet. We invented it. We're the most dependent on it of any nation, and what's it done for us? Well, it's given us a tremendous burst of economic growth. It's brought the world much closer together. It's changed young people's lives dramatically. But from the national security perspective, we've opened up a whole new attack vector. There was always Soviet disinformation, but it used to start in India with an obscure publication that would then get picked up by some British tabloid and someone would repeat it in the United States. Now it's put out instantly by bots. It's all over social media. We're threatening through the internet our armed forces. We threaten our economy, and we threaten the very foundations of government. This is not a threat that's going to be cured lightly. We're going into 5G. Now, we could have said 5G was going to be dominated by the U.S. government, but we didn't make that decision. We turned it over to the internet service providers, Verizon, AT&T. We said, give us maximum bandwidth and low latency. Forget about security. The FCC recommended in 2016 that the internet 5G design be designed for security. But that recommendation was not adopted. So what we've done is we've broadened, deepened, and made much more potent the attack vector into the United States. Long-term threat. Third, long-term, let's call it a challenge. Over the last 35 years, we've financialized our economy. We've offshored the economy. We've globalized the economy. We've gone so far as to undercut our own businesses. We've undercut our legitimacy with growing inequities in income and wealth. And we've opened ourselves to potentially catastrophic economic instability that we saw a glimpse of in 2008. So as much as we love our economy, as much as we're proud of the capitalist system and market allocation, we have to understand that manufacturing has gone down relative to finance. Finance is about using money to make money. There's $650 trillion of dark derivatives out there based on foreign exchange. Nobody knows who owes what to whom. So we saw Lehman collapse in 2008. Is it going to be Italy that triggers this? Is it going to be some deliberate stunt by one of our adversaries? What is it? But all we know is that we've got to really watch the financial system. And then we brought Russia and China in from the cold. We fed the emergence of peer competitors. They're bent on disrupting the rules of international order, undercutting our influence abroad, our security at home, and they're fully capable with nuclear weapons and other weapons of unleashing new and more destructive technologies of warfare. And with China, we face for the first time in American history a nation with more potential economic power than we have. 4 times the population, a larger integrated market. There are more middle-class Chinese today than there are Americans total. We're into something, against something that we've never, ever seen before. And it is a rival system of government. That's the 4th major challenge. And then 5th, we persisted in denying the evidence of the effects of economic development on the Earth's atmosphere and oceans. We, and I say we here, this is the United States, not the rest of the world, but in the United States, our government doesn't accept that we must take action to deal with climate change. Now, maybe 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide doesn't mean anything to you. But that's what the best scientists in the world said we should try to stay under. And we're going up from 410 to 413 this year. We're going up 3.5 parts per million per year. And actually it's accelerating. It's caused by economic development. In India, in China, they're the biggest right now, bigger than us. But somehow, if we don't work on this, we're going to end up with consequences that will wreck agriculture, cause unwanted migration, and disrupt governments, and become a true national security crisis. These 5 long-term challenges all have a lot in common. First of all, the military can't keep us safe by itself. Secondly, there's no single technology that will keep us safe. Government can't do it by itself, but neither can the private sector. No nation working alone can resolve these longer-term challenges. And you can't do it without more resources. So what we need for our national security is more vigorous economic growth. We need far-sighted leadership that can get beyond in each election saying this is the most important election in my lifetime. We need alliances, and we need a new peacetime national strategy that will endure through successive presidencies to see us through. Now, NATO. NATO is like a sausage-making machine. You take different national policies, you put them into the machinery, you grind it through. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 6 months, and out comes unified NATO policy. And that policy is by and large binding on the members of NATO. I remember being in a NATO ministerial meeting when we were doing the bombing in Kosovo, and the Greek ambassador said to me, General, he said, you're bombing these Serb factories, and they're making trucks, and he said, these factories are owned by Greeks. I said, Mr. Ambassador, these factories are in Serbia. I'm very sorry about the Greek ownership. He said, yes, I know, it's a shame. And that was the end of the discussion. The Greeks couldn't fight it. So NATO's a sausage-making machine. It's endured many, many crises in its existence. Every 4, 5, 6 years, 10 years, there's an existential crisis for NATO. We had a crisis in NATO when NATO actually supported the American invasion of Iraq. And we had a crisis in NATO again when it turned out that Russia was actually behind the operations in Ukraine, and it shot down the Malaysian airliner. NATO is always lurching from crisis to crisis, but somehow it's succeeded all these years. Where NATO fails is in its actual operations. NATO went into Afghanistan without a plan. NATO didn't succeed. NATO could have taken action in the case of Syria in 2010, 2011 to deal with refugees. NATO did not take action. NATO could have handled Syrian air defense then. NATO did not challenge Syrian air defense. NATO could have done something to stop the migrant flow into Europe. NATO stood back and did nothing. NATO's taken some actions against cyber by setting up a cyber terrorism center in Estonia and really focusing on it since the Russian attacks on Estonia in 2007. and NATO talks a good game about working against terrorism. But here's the truth. NATO is an American organization. It's ours. And when there's no American leadership, there's no NATO leadership. And when you hear in the press that there's a failure in NATO, you better look to Washington, D.C., because that's where the failure starts. The failure of NATO in Afghanistan was the failure of the United States in Afghanistan to ever have a winning strategy. The failure of NATO in Syria was the failure of the United States to seize the problem and deal with Syria the way we were successful in dealing with it in the Balkans. We didn't. We backed away. We blamed NATO. It was American failure. So if you want NATO to be successful, as it must be in the future, got to have U.S. leadership. NATO has to address broader threats. The cyber threat is more than simply shutting down communications. It's a threat of disinformation and election interference and a whole lot of hybrid warfare activities that we see on practice fields in Ukraine. They're being applied against the United States and now against the and against our allies. Even in countries like Indonesia today, where there's an election coming up on Tuesday, I think it is, there's widespread election cheating going on. There's all kinds of, we're not even watching Indonesia in this country, but I guarantee you our adversaries are active there. You've got to address border threats, we've got to be proactive, and NATO has to come together to address China. Not simply by sending U.S. ships through the South China Sea, but by looking at its economic and political relationships with China. When you have China penetrating into the European Union through Italy and into Hungary, you have a threat to the integrity of the European Union, and you have a threat to NATO. So I think NATO recognizes this. The question is, will the United States provide the leadership we need to pull this alliance together? We cannot face China without a strong NATO alliance. That's the simple truth of this. So, look, this is a dark conference. I'm a little bit concerned, but somehow the United States made it through despite all the problems of the Cold War. We made it. And we can make it through again because there's so much talent in this country. We just have to have the right tools, and we've got to use our greatest weapons. Greatest weapons we have are American young people. We've got to educate them, we've got to empower them with financial backing, and we've got to send them out through Africa, Central America, South America, the Middle East, and let them create the jobs and the businesses and the support that's needed to keep strong our international system that we built after the Second World War. So I don't want to just end this on a dark prediction, but we are in a dangerous position. We have to face where we are. We have to take the right measures. China already has 5 nations in the Caribbean that have signed up for One Belt, One Road. Right now in the Caribbean island of Curacao, because we cut off the oil, that country, little island country, is bankrupt. And they're looking for oil from where? Iran. And financing from Iran. So we're going to lose Curacao too. So we've got to get our economic house in order. We've got to use our economic tools out there as our leading edge before we call on men and women in uniform. And then we've got to invest in the new technologies and rebuilding of our military force that we need. Thank you very much.